solamente unhas verbas para dar a benvida a todos e darles grazas a Lucas López de parte de Covas por ter a ben contarnos parte do que é o seu traballo de investigación dentro do doutoramento. E seguirás agora como coordinador de doutorado, pero parece importante que os alumnos teñan esta relación o máis perta posible con Ecovas. Non ten sentido ningún ter un centro de investigación se os alumnos de doutoramento non están vencellados a él e non comparten e non compartimos nos con eles. Entón, moitas grazas, Lucas, polo bo dispor. E nada, deixote a ti, Miguel, para que fagas as puntualizacións oportunas. Moitas grazas.
Okay, thank you, Maria. So thanks to Lucas, thanks to Covas for the organization. You know, these type of research seminars are focused on one of our students or even our scholars try to present an idea. In this case, it's a new idea, I would say. So all the questions are welcome. We expect you to ask questions and help Lucas to provide feedback on what you think about the topic and whether you have some feedback to improve the overall story he's going to tell. Thank you, Lucas. Go ahead.
So, hi everybody. Today I will be presenting this idea that I've been working on in the last months. Is the first version of the paper. I haven't done a seminar with these papers the first time, so let's see how it works out and what do you think. As the title says, I will be talking about despotic political systems and the historical evolution of social preference. So, to begin with, a little bit of motivation. Right now, it's well-grounded in economics and elsewhere that individuals transcend narrow self-interest when making choices, right? We're not only motivated by our economic needs. Incentives to maximize gains opportunistically exist in any social and economic interaction, but still, we see that cooperation exists. We provide public goods, we wage wars, or we collectively manage different pools of resources. And this occurs even if cooperation entails significant costs, if it involves genetically unrelated individuals, and if cooperation lacks the instruments for direct reciprocity. We know why. Because social preference exists. Sometimes we behave altruistically, we trust in strangers, and also we tend to conform with the expectations of our social groups. But we are just starting to understand the cultural evolutionary process that made this social preference so different across societies. Why some societies are more altruistic than others. Why others conform more or less. To illustrate, this is a global distribution of the variable of embeddedness. The belief that me, Lucas, should fit in with the dispositions of the group. Fairness, be fair with others. A lot of difference across the globe. And the rate of blood donations to non-family members. So, what I try to do in this paper is to explain this cross and within-country variation in social preferences as a function of the historical exposure to despotic political systems. And with regard to social preferences, I focus on two key social preferences: conformity and impersonal processuality. And these two preferences have been shown to explain voluntary contributions to non-profit organizations, coordination in collective action and public good provision, socially responsible behaviors in individuals and organizations, differences in organizational practices and outcomes, innovation rates, and democratic quality. So a lot of things. To begin with, I would like to introduce some characteristics of despotic societies, right? So they all in the same line. Despotic societies, first characteristic, rigid hierarchical structures with a hereditary leader exerting nearly absolute control. So there is a person at the top and the rest of society is order in some hierarchical position. Privileges are assigned depending on the social distance with the ruler. So for instance, if we are in a stratified society, privileges and obligations will be associated with each strata. If we are in a society with a strong kinship, privileges and obligations will be allocated depending on the family distance with the ruler. That is usually the head of the family, of course. Also, sharply defined social roles. Subjects are forced to follow the social conventions of the social strata. The ruler is often divine. People think that the ruler is a descendant of a god or an ancestor comes from a divine origin. And of course, failing to behave accordingly mean punishment. Lower strata is usually exploited as a labor force of the state to enlarge the coffers of the state, amount economic surplus, and the means of production are mainly controlled by the rulers. So common people don't have a direct take on what is done in the society. And this is important. Ritual and symbolism is used to legitimize not only the position of the ruler as an outstanding, usually a man, but only to entrench inequality in the society. So this symbolism and ritualism is used to mark the differences in the social strata. And two examples. The first one, to the left, is the clothing Hawaiian chiefs wore to distinguish themselves from the common people. And another ritual is, we all know this, the coronation of a French king. So this is maybe more familiar to us. But it still is a ritual to mark this hierarchy between the ruler and other social strata. The paper posits that the two major consequences of being under despotic rule or being in this social system are, first, the development of strong conformity preferences. The rigid hierarchical structure, the control of these societies made conformity a fundamental idea for acceptance. If you didn't conform, you would lose the support of your peers. You would lose the access to resources. In the worst case, you would be ostracized or killed, right? So this means that conformity had a relative advantage with respect to other cultural traits. And we know from cultural evolutionary models that if a trait has higher payoffs, this trait becomes widespread in the society. But also we need to add an individual selection pressure to these group pressures I'm talking about. That is, that individuals in restrictive conditions would acquire a psychology of conformism, of conservatism. So this idea would also contribute to explain why conformity preferences unfolded, strong conformity preferences unfolded in despotic societies. The second consequence, the decay of impersonal prosociality. And this is as well the result of the extractive nature of the state, this rigid social hierarchy. First, in these societies there was conflict, a strong conflict between social classes to change the social order. Lower strata versus higher strata in order to control the means of production. For instance, if we take a Marxist approach. And we know that fractionalization, group conflict, and discrimination weaken social preferences in individuals. Second, there was an intra-group competition for scarce resources, so this means a conflict, within-class conflicts. We know also that intra-group competition fuels unfairness and weaken trust in others. So because of this research, one could assume that impersonal prosociality unfolded in these despotic societies. To make the hypothesis of this work explicit, Despotic political systems have favored the development of conformity preferences and at the same time prevented the development of impersonal processuality. So, any doubts so far? No? Okay.
Just a comment.
Yes?
I'm not sure if in the slide of the economic theories we're talking about social rules more than social preferences. Because social preferences in economic theory, it is, for example, nowadays, be aware of the contamination, pollution, and then this implies several things. For instance, the non-Pareto optimality of the equilibrium allocations, and I think that I heard about more than nothing social rules that in fact condition the selfish preferences. If everybody wear a special hat, maybe makes ends to have. My selfish preferences like to have this hat. But in economic theory, social preferences, interdependent preferences, are preferences that depends on my own consumption, my selfish consumption, and the consumption of the others. Then pollution, then democratic behavior, then many things. And these are externalities. Then equilibrium prices don't produce optimal allocation. This is only a small observation. It's nothing to do with your work. It's
so the terminology
with the name.
With the name, okay. No, it's a good point. I will take it because this idea builds on there is some works out there, especially in this area of economics, that talk about social preferences as this broad umbrella to encompass altruism, trust. So this, but it's something to consider.
Cases of social or preferences are altruism and the umbrella. On the other word, another word you use is fairness. The fairness, in a general sense, means fairness. But in economic theory, fairness is envy-free and Pareto optimality and many things.
Okay.
And there is several. Sometimes the language we use means different things in field, in another field.
Okay. No, only the comments, but yeah, it's something to consider. Yeah, definitely. Anything else? No. Okay. So let's talk about the empirical strategy. I draw on two complementary analyses to test this hypothesis from different historical realities. First, the presence of political hereditary elites in 1265 ancestral ethnic groups, and this data comes from the ethnographic atlas and the standard cross-cultural sample. And then from the exposure to absolutist monarchies in Europe, West Asia, North Africa between 800 and 1800. And precisely I use historical data of major cities in these regions. And data comes from DeLon and Schilfer and Bosker et al., who extend the DeLon and Schilfer's data and many others. And then, regarding the analysis, I use historical and contemporary analysis at the ethnic, country, and individual level. We'll go over this later. So, a little bit on the variables, right? The variable of hereditary succession is a binary variable that takes the value of 1 when patrilineal or matrilineal hereditary succession exists in these societies. And I use this variable for the ethnic analysis, or analysis at the ethnic group level. For the country level measure, I follow Schultz et al. And Barami and Rad, and build estimations of the historical exposure to hereditary succession for each country. How do I do this? First, I match the ethnic group's language to contemporary language use Glottolog. That is an open database that records all the languages in the world, or all the living languages. Then I use the ethnologue shapefile that divides the world in polygons, and then I'm able to match languages with the distribution across the world. Then I use data from the gridded population of the world to obtain the people living in each polygon. So we have the data of the ethnic group, the division of languages across the world, and the number of people living in each polygon of this division made from the ethnologue. As a result, I can aggregate at the country level, at modern boundary country level, this measure with population weighted average. And this is a country level estimate of the hereditary succession variable across the world. So we see that mainly is concentrated in parts of South America, Africa, and Asia. Interestingly, in Europe, there is a low history of hereditary succession. The measure of exposure to absolutism. For the historical analysis, I use the percentage of the population living in cities under the absolutist rule, and a country average. And I'm able to calculate this variable for each 100-year period. So it's a panel data design. For the country level measure, I use the population weighted average of the total number of years a country's cities were under absolutist rule between 800 and 1800. So basically, I take each city, calculate the number of years this city has been under absolutist control, and I calculate a weighted average across the country, weighted by the population of that city. And this is a distribution across countries of this variable. Again, we see that North Africa and Asia have both strong exposure to absolutism, and Europe a bit less. And then we have variation within Europe. For the analysis, to begin with, this is a kind of a preliminary analysis where I want to provide some evidence on the relationship between hereditary succession and all these characteristics of despotic societies we've seen before. So stratification, slavery, social rigidity, and strong normative compliance. Also, I want to provide some evidence on the social control of absolutist monarchs. And I do so by looking at the relationship between absolutism and the production and consumption of books. Then I will turn to the main hypothesis of the paper, that is proving that despotic political systems have influence in the development of social preferences, and I do so by contemporary country and individual level analysis. And finally, we will be looking at how despotic political systems and social preferences both together shape countries' development trajectories. And by countries' development trajectories, I mean economic development, innovation, institutional quality, and democratic quality. So, focusing on hereditary succession and social structure of ethnic groups. There are several accounts, hypotheses of how stratification unfolded in these societies. The first one, from theoretical economics, say that inequality in property rights was the source for this stratification because elites were able to exclude most individuals from the most productive land. So this appropriation created a distinction between commoners and elites. Second, from anthropology, this perspective places less emphasis on property rights and the accumulation of economic surplus and focus more on the cosmology and the belief system of the societies. inequality, differences between social strata was already embedded in the cosmology, in how we believe society should be. Slavery. So, between economics and anthropology as well, exploitation of lower strata. We want to increase the economic surplus we extract from commoners, we just make them slaves. The byproduct of social stratification, debt is slavery. Social strata is already impoverished. In difficult times, they have to ask for money to elites. They cannot repay, they become slaves. And of course, there is this cosmology of slavery. Some tribes just thought that some people should be of a lower strata. They shouldn't be individuals. They just only were slaves to others, property. And based on this stratification and slavery, it's easy to think how these societies were rigid and with individuals having to comply a lot with the social norms. Imagine that a slave don't comply with a social norm, right? It's killed and that's all, it's property. So results. This is just a raw comparison of means between societies with hereditary succession and without hereditary succession. We see that there is a significant difference only just by looking at the means difference. Of course, there are several regressions using controls, but basically the effect is the same. Higher, the presence of hereditary elites increases the probability of stratification, slavery, social rigidity, and a strong social conformity. Now let's turn to absolutism and social control. Remember that we will be talking about book production and book consumption. The printing press changed our relationship with knowledge. The mass printing of books, the access to knowledge, the diffusion of innovation, technological change, a lot of things. Indeed, the existence of printing press is thought to be an early factor in the differential economic growth of European regions in the 16th century. But also it was a process of social and economic change, a means to challenge the status quo, ideas of egalitarianism, ideas of equality. So this could threaten the status quo of inequality, of this conceived social order that there was to be a person up there and many commoners without rights. Of course, absolutist governments use this potential of the printing press as a tool for social control. So they started to censor books that threatened the status quo. Of course, this is related to the role of the church, but this is another thing. And in the estimations, I control for the exposure to religion and bishops and many other things. But the main consequence that I posit is that this censorship is related to a lower production and consumption of books. First, a lack of freedom to express ideas. If you are less free to express your ideas, this means at the aggregate level that less people will be writing books. Then, it was punished to be involved in the circulation of censored books, so there wasn't incentives to participate in these dynamics. And of course, we have an argument of economic supply, that those authors publishing books with an ideology that was aligned with the ruler will receive higher economic support. We have this economic incentive to publish ideological aligned books. Some estimations, different specifications, different controls, but the main thing to see is that higher exposure to absolutism is related to a lower production of books and a lower annual per capita consumption of books. And these estimations control for literacy rates and population density as a proxy of economic development. Now, let's turn to the main hypothesis or proposition of this paper. I carried out several country-level analyses that proxy conformity as cultural restraint, individualism, looseness, embeddedness, intellectual autonomy, and affective autonomy. And at the same time, they proxy impersonal prosociality through generalized trust, blood donations, parking ticket violations, nepotism, particularism, and fairness. Although I assess, in the empirics, I assess the relationship between hereditary succession and exposure to absolutism separately with these dependent variables, the analysis have to be thought as an overall evidence. So don't think of this analysis as hereditary succession increases individualism, but think of these proxies as a cultural package, right? All the cultural package in the conformity proxies from a psychology, a culture of conformity, and those in impersonal prosociality from a culture of impersonal prosociality. So let's understand the estimations as aggregate models. I won't show the estimations because that would be a mess. Just this graph, red bars, the estimates of models with hereditary succession as independent variable. Blue bars, models with exposure to absolutism as independent variable. And then the black thing, the black bars is the confidence intervals, okay? So basically what we see is that despotic political, at the aggregate level, of course, we see that despotic political systems are related to a higher conformity. We see more restraint, lower individualism, lower cultural looseness, higher embeddedness, and so on. And at the same time, with lower impersonal prosociality, lower generalized trust, fairness, lower blood donations to non-family, and on the other hand, higher particularism, nepotism, and parking ticket violations. Then, if we have time, we can go through robustness analysis and causality concerns and these things. So marginal effects, just to see that this effect is not conditional on any value of the independent variable. We can see this effect between the -2 standard deviation and +2 standard deviation. So is present across all the distribution of the independent variable. And now the individual level analysis, and I use the World Value Survey for this analysis. Conformity proxies, again, autonomy, importance of behaving properly, importance of tradition, obedience as a child quality, importance of following rules. And these latter variables is because of informational constraints in the World Value Survey. This variable is only available in robustness checks with the European Social Survey samples. And impersonal prosociality, fairness, generalized trust, inverse social trust, and favoritism. Again, this last one in the European Social Survey samples. The results, similar conclusions. Higher hereditary succession, higher exposure to absolutism, reduced autonomy of individuals, increased the importance of behaving properly, the importance of tradition, the importance of obedience, reduce the fairness, reduce general trust, and increase the differential trust between the in-group and the out-group. So this means that those people with exposure to hereditary succession trust more the in-group, those people in the in-group, the family, friends, than those of the out-group, people from other country, from other religion. And finally, let's talk about the influence of despotic political systems social preferences, and development trajectories. The idea here is that we don't only have a direct effect between despotic political systems and countries' development trajectories because of the institutional persistence of autocratic institutions, but also we have an indirect effect that travels to this effect on culture. So what we have here is an effect between despotism and country development trajectories mediated by culture, in this case, social preferences. So in this section, I start with historical static analysis of despotism, of the effect of despotism on development, economic development, on ancestral ethnic groups. And for this section, I rely on the measure of hereditary succession, just because it's available for many countries around the world. And the dependent variables are community size and population density. Then I turn to historical dynamic analysis at the country level, and I proxy economic development through population density, urbanization rates, and total built-up area, and then some contemporaneous mediation analysis, also at the country level. These are the first estimations, communities at the ethnic group. So we see that hereditary succession reduces both community size and population density. These are proxies to measure economic development historically. Then we have the historical dynamic analysis. Basically, here's the coefficient of estimation, and these are the years. Because of the data, prior to 1700, I was able to estimate only it's 100 years, but after, it's 20. So what we have, that the role of hereditary succession was not significant economically and statistically until 1750 around, right? But then it became really significant and negative. And we see this pattern, not only these are the estimations for population density, but we see also the very same pattern in urbanization rates and total built-up area. To me, what this means is the role of culture, because if we understand that hereditary succession made some differences, some effects in the culture, and precisely it increased conformity and decreasing personal prosociality, when increases in conformity and lower levels of impersonal prosociality are both related to economic development, what is happening here is that at the time of the Industrial Revolution, of the Enlightenment, despotic political systems played a fundamental role. Differently put, the kind of intellectual, political innovations that took place in Europe at the time of the Enlightenment, of the Industrial Revolution, wouldn't have occurred in places with despotic political systems, because the culture there wasn't just the correct one. And to assess this perspective is then when I perform this historical dynamic analysis where I don't think you can see, no, many things. Basically here I regress 6 variables: income per worker, scientific articles per capita, patents per capita, the index of democratic quality, polity 2, and the rule of law. On both is a mediation analysis on each cultural variable. We have panel A, regression, panel B, individualism, panel C, panel D, panel E. And we have the indirect, direct, and total effects. Overall, what these regressions mean is that we have a negative effect of despotic political system on countries' development trajectories. And the idea is that this direct effect is because of the institutional persistence of autocratic institutions. At the same time, we have a negative effect that travels through conformity and impersonal processuality. And this comes along because of cultural differences. Despotic political systems have increased the conformity of individuals, and this reduces all these variables proxying for countries' development trajectories. And at the same time, it reduces impersonal processuality doing the same thing. And as some conclusions, two very clear conclusions. First, despotic political systems explain part of this reactivara. So, despotic political systems explain part of this variability in conformity preferences, social preferences, and at the same time, understanding the country's current development trajectories, innovation, democracy, economic development, requires us to look back and to think about how social arrangements have influenced directly the institutions we have today, but at the same time, how the social arrangements, or in this case, the historical political economy of the society, has affected culture, because culture has an effect on innovation, economic development, and so on. So right now I'm open to comments and to suggestions, and I expect you to tear down this paper right now. So.
Well, okay, thank you. So questions in the room or in the chat are very welcome. And in case you don't have anything, I have some of them, at least. Questions, please.
Maria.
Yes, Maria, you can open the micro.
Well, thank you. I didn't want to be the first one, but since to start up then, thank you so much for this very, very interesting paper. You have done a lot of work. You combine a lot of different data sources. It's very interesting. It's very, very attractive. I have maybe more comments than questions at this point, but I thought it was super interesting, and I very much like it, and I congratulate you for that. You have done an amazing work collecting the data and analyzing it. Very interesting, very neat. One of the results you have shown is the importance of culture, and if I understood correctly, was you measure it according to the number of books printed, correctly?
Maria, I cannot hear you very well, so.
Okay, so sorry, then I will write in the chat.
Okay, that would be wonderful, thank you.
And you guys start with other questions. Take care, and thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we will wait for Maria to write in the chat because we have some problems with the audio. It's difficult to hear because of the speaker. Meanwhile, I have a doubt, which is what is the target audience of this paper? The target audience of this paper.
The target audience is basically people. There is right now a growing body of research looking multidisciplinarity from a multidisciplinary perspective at this issue. So here we have a bunch of economists, a bunch of biologists, anthropologists, historians. So there is this broad field of cultural evolution, historical economics, historical psychology. So this is the audience. Yes.
So we have the question of Maria.
Yes, that's a very good question, Maria. The type of book is already embedded in the construction of the variable. So with new books and consumption of books, what is measured is different editions of a book, meaningful. So the books, updates of a book, but with meaningful differences, or different books. So this variable does not measure how many times a book has been printed. It's just the number of different books or different editions if they are meaningfully different to what has been printed before. But thank you.
Okay, the question in the chat was for the classroom, what is the cultural knowledge and what is cultural knowledge and what is religion?
I understand that this question is the follow-up to the first one, right, Maria? Because otherwise I don't understand it very well. Okay, perfect.
More questions in the classroom or in the chat?
Okay, thank you, Lucas. A very interesting paper. In relation to Miguel's question, it would be good that you put this in a context of the literature. I don't know whether, of course, this is complex because, you are talking about very different strands of knowledge, actually, not even within economics or. So, many of the conclusions seem to be not very counterintuitive of what we know, right? So perhaps even if they don't follow your approach, it could be interesting to put the paper in a wider context for future presentations, right? And also to relate your findings with other kind of results from the literature. I don't work in anything similar to this, but of course it is. I'm interested in many of the topics you are dealing with, and I wonder. I think there is a relationship between civilization. Let's say, when we progress as a society towards historical periods and despotic rules. I think most societies across the world, when they get developed in the early stages, they are despotic. I was thinking about but you see this of course, in the Middle East, you see it in China, you see it in South America, you see it in India, everywhere, right? So I wonder whether, you could exploit this as well, or, this kind of, these despotic systems are widespread. You don't. Also, another question that raised your presentation is how you define. I guess that you take political scientists or other disciplines about what is a despotic rule or absolutist or whatever, right? But for me, it's sometimes a difficult. There is a difficult border between, because before the French Revolution, even countries that we may not consider fully despotic, they were rather despotic, like England or other places, right? So how do you distinguish this? Because most societies were despotic until, and even after the French Revolution, many other countries that we consider democratic now were highly despotic. I mean, many people couldn't vote. I mean, there were, highly despotic structures in these countries, right? I mean, there are comments. Unfortunately, I cannot provide more.
No, the comments are very good. The context, yes, indeed. In the paper at the end of the introduction, I specifically talk about the literatures to which this paper speaks. They basically are two, maybe three. First one is just explaining the cultural differences across the world. This is the most straightforward outcome of this paper. Then this would fit on a broader level on this literature explaining not from this cultural evolutionary perspective culture. So for instance, there is a hypothesis that is this stress pathogen hypothesis. So those societies that has been exposed to the prevalence of infectious diseases have developed a particular culture, right? But this is an environmental strain. Then it would talk about the consequences of the political economy. So we know that there has been a lot of work on the emergence of the state. This is one of the oldest topics in economics, but then there is not so many studies looking at the consequences of the despotic political system and of these political systems. Indeed, from this perspective, this cultural evolutionary perspective, there is one looking at the consequences of consensual institutions in these historical societies on the evolution of culture and growth. So, and finally, this perspective of the long-term determinants of growth. Right? We have to go probably. There are studies looking at what happened in 10,000 BC to explain what is happening today. So in this range of studies, there is also, but this is a section, a paragraph at the end. So, but yeah, and then about the measure of despotic systems, I borrowed the measure for two guys that it was an old paper in 1990s, and then this data was updated by two guys here I cited from which I borrowed the data that specifically construct the measure of if a city had a despotic rule or a non-despotic rule. So I just borrow the measure and I don't get in troubles with, because it's really, really difficult to decide. Indeed, in this paper, they explicitly address this concern, saying that it's very difficult, but we take this criteria and we follow it straightforwardly. So it's in that paper.
We have a couple of three questions in the chat. Maria asks, where do you get the printed tickets violations from? What was the database for that? That means corruption can play a very significant role reducing the number of violations reported. There is a very relevant paper on that, Fisman 26. And this is just a comment about the potential problem of this variable.
So the variable is taken, I don't remember, I can share it with you, I don't remember the paper, but basically they use this measure to proxy for the same, for impersonal processuality, yes. But I don't remember off the top of my head the place of the measure. I kind of remember how this variable was constructed. That is, there was 3 years. During 3 years, if a diplomat to the UN had a parking ticket fee, this fee had to be paid by the state. So this shows you how the impersonal procedure is, if I don't care about the fee and my state pays it, so I'm less prosocial than if I would park correctly and I don't get this fee. So that I don't know, I don't remember exactly but the idea behind this measure is this one. But again, I can share you with you the paper.
Yeah, maybe the question could be the first date from which you have violations, this type of tickets. So it could be a problem that the first year you have data for that.
No, the data here is cross-section. So this is an average. The years is from 1999 to 2001. So it was a relatively little span.
Okay. Then Ignacio asks, many authoritarian regimes are supposed to be backed up by God or eventually by a philosopher, like the case of Confucius in China. In this country, the government is the father of the people who does nothing but looking for wellness of the people. This approach seemed to be very successful during the years. Is this a special characteristic of China, or whether China is a particular case of?
Answer this question would take me to learn a lot about the history of China. I'm not entitled to answer these questions. What I can say is that there is a lot of conversation in this difference between the good ruler and the bad ruler, right? The good ruler is that one who makes infrastructure, who pushes the country up front, but then the bad ruler comes and starts to extract the wellness of the society. So my opinion is that this good ruler, bad ruler dynamic was present potentially in nearly all the societies in the world across history. So I don't know that much about China specifically.
Okay, then Alejandro gives you the thanks and would like to know what were the motivations that brought you to do this research or this paper. When looking at multidisciplinarity, could you explain how did you mix the different disciplines and how this influenced the variables you choose? Do you take into account, for example, studies similar to Bourdieu's work on reproduction, different types of capital, and maybe how the regimes, as you say, reproduce social strata that reproduce these inequalities? Quite long question, 3 questions in a single one.
I think I will start by the end because the first one is more philosophical, I guess. How this regime, you say, reproduces the strata that reproduces inequalities? This is a difficult question, right? You have, of course, there is a perspective that says if you have a ruler and this ruler sets up a lot of strong institutions, then the social mobility will be reduced. But then you have a lot of examples, and one of them is the French Revolution, that if you provide, if people have a particular culture, then it doesn't matter that much what institutions are around, because people can change institutions. Of course, institutions affect behavior, but and this is my personal take on this, culture matters a bit more than institutions, because if you provide a country with the adequate institutions and then the culture is not right, nothing will happen. But if a country has a good culture, but then it has the wrong institutions, then some things can be worked out. So in that case, if, let's say, a regime, an autocratic regime, has a lot of strong and rigid institutions, but the culture is different. Another problem is that possibly this regime, as we saw in the paper, this regime influenced the development of a particular culture. Then you are completely landlocked in this situation where you have bad or not the appropriate culture and not the appropriate institutions. This is another thing. But in the case that in the thought experiment that there was this good culture and the bad institutions, I think that the good culture will change the good institutions. And when looking, I think it's the same question. No? The first question is, are all related. How how to do, I would sum up this, the first question is how to, how I come to engage in multidisciplinary research. I guess is my own conception of how science works. I don't believe that much in the strict boundaries that today we see in the scientific fields. I don't see differences I see differences, but not too many differences, or at least not too strong to impede that you're not talking with me. No, I mean, the conversation is broad. We need to implement arguments from different things. You cannot close your eyes in front of evidence because it's from another field. No, that's silly for the advancement of science and for the humanity as a whole. So basically, it's that just I came across this problem, that is why people behave as they do. At the very first, I thought that was the main issue was conformity. Then you read about this literature. You read not only economics, you read psychology, you read anthropology, sociology, and you realize that there are many different things. And then the idea evolves. You see that there is something with authority. This has to be, if you think authority from a historical perspective, it has to be about rulers. Then you see that you read a paper that says that conflict between classes reduces the impersonal processuality. So you start to think also about impersonal processuality. Then you match, and then the empirics support your intuition. That is this wonderful thing that the empirics sometimes.
It's how life is a complex thing and complex theories.
But I would like to emphasize this multidisciplinary perspective. We don't have to limit ourselves, right? I would like to see papers bringing in perspective from different fields, even though this is difficult at the time of publication, because you need to talk about this. And yeah, but this is very narrow, right? You have a lot of things. Yeah, but no, I don't agree with that.
Don't you think that this may cause a problem to find a journal to publish this? Because one of the problems we have, at least in management, maybe in all the other areas, is that most of reviewers say that if you use more than two theories, there is something strange.
This is because of doctrination of who read your paper. This is the problem. No, this is because of the journals. It's because of the people who read and work, the reviewers and the editors. So it's an institution. There is a structural problem. So how we can change it with culture?
Yeah, I know. So if you were to summarize all these ideas into a single sentence. Yes, I know, because we need to synthesize the topic. What is the topic? What is your summary of your main idea of this speech?
Of the paper. So basically, our history matters a lot, and it matters, I think, most than we want to believe. Then we see that the historical, political, economy of societies affects even today how we behave, and it affects the development of countries. And I would like to end with a question. If this is right and we are prisoners of our past, how do we change things? This is we are seeing, and there is a growing body of evidence that we depend a lot on the past. Are we able to change to face the problems nowadays? Climate change, inequality, poverty.
So
if
then
we
you
are
have,
seeing that we depend so much from the past.
then you have a new paper, how much is the effect of the past and how much the effect of what we change today to change tomorrow. A different paper. I think
Of
that's
course, no, but
the best idea is the latest one. Do you have more comments, questions? I think it's impressive work, impressive paper, complex, although you try to synthesize, and I congratulate because it's impressive work. One cannot know what the amount of hours behind that.
500,
Only you.
600 maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Excellent. So thank you very much for the presentation. Thanks.